The front door closed with a soft click as Alira Monet stepped into the house earlier than she was supposed to. The hallway lights were off, and the evening air inside felt strangely still. She set her purse on the entry table and rubbed her temples. The birthday dinner at her cousin's place had been loud and crowded, and the dull headache behind her eyes had convinced her to leave early. Gavin had texted earlier saying he would be working late anyway, so she expected the house to be empty. For a moment, everything seemed ordinary. The faint scent of the lavender candle she liked still lingered in the living room. The clock above the kitchen doorway ticked steadily. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. Home. That word used to bring her comfort. But something felt off. Alira slipped off her shoes and walked farther into the house. Her footsteps were quiet against the wooden floor. She was halfway toward the stairs when she heard it. Laughter. A woman's laughter. Alira stopped walking immediately. The sound floated faintly from the upper floor. Her mind searched quickly for explanations. Maybe the television was on. Maybe Gavin had invited co-workers over for a late meeting. Maybe she was misunderstanding what she heard. But then another sound reached her. Gavin's voice. Low, relaxed, playful in a way she had not heard in a long time. The tone carried a level of intimacy that made her stomach tighten. Alira stood frozen in the hallway. Her heart began beating harder, each thud echoing in her chest. Don't assume the worst, she whispered to herself. Yet something inside her already knew. For 5 years, she had lived in this house. She knew every sound it made, every creak in the stairs, every shift in the air. And this silence, this strange quiet wrapped around laughter, it did not belong here. Slowly, almost cautiously, Alira looked toward the staircase. The laughter came again, softer this time, closer. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides as a heavy realization settled over her. Someone else was in her home, upstairs, in her bedroom, and suddenly, the house that had once felt safe now felt unfamiliar, like she had walked into a stranger's life. Alira took a slow breath. Then she began walking toward the stairs. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the thought of betrayal never even crossed your mind? The kind of trust where you build your entire life around that person, believing they would never hurt you. Alira believed that too. For years, she stood beside Gavin through everything. But tonight, something in this quiet house was about to change her life forever. If you enjoy emotional storytelling like this, and believe people deserve second chances in life and love, make sure you subscribe to Midnight Story Vault and tell me in the comments, what would you do if you walked into your home and heard someone else upstairs? The staircase felt longer than usual as Alira climbed slowly, her hands sliding along the wooden rail for balance. Each step carried the faint echo of laughter drifting from the bedroom at the end of the hallway. Her bedroom. The door was not fully closed. A thin line of warm light stretched across the carpet, and the quiet murmur of voices slipped through the small opening. Alira's heartbeat pounded in her ears. For a brief moment she considered turning around, pretending she had never come home early, pretending this strange feeling inside her chest wasn't real. But the laughter came again, closer now. She stepped forward and pushed the door open. The room came into view instantly. Gavin was sitting in their bed, and beside him, wrapped loosely in the sheets, was a woman Alira recognized immediately, his assistant from the office. Time seemed to stop as all three of them stared at each other. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Alira stood in the doorway, her fingers gripping the frame, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. The room smelled faintly of perfume and Gavin's expensive cologne, a mix that made her stomach tighten. The woman beside him quickly pulled the blanket higher around herself, avoiding Alira's eyes. Gavin, however, looked almost bored, not embarrassed, not startled, just mildly inconvenienced. Well, he said with a quiet sigh, swinging his legs off the bed, this happened sooner than I expected. Alira blinked, struggling to process the calmness in his voice. Expected, she whispered. Instead of answering directly, Gavin walked toward the nightstand and picked up a thick envelope resting beside the lamp. He crossed the room and placed it into her trembling hands. The weight of the paper felt heavier than it should have. Alira looked down slowly. Divorce papers, already signed. Alira stared down at the documents in disbelief. The black ink of Gavin's signature looked sharp and final against the white paper. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. "You planned this?" she asked quietly. Gavin leaned against the dresser with an expression that showed more impatience than regret. "Let's not turn this into a dramatic scene," he replied. Behind him, his assistant watched silently, the corner of her mouth lifting in a faint, amused smile. Alira's hands trembled as she held the envelope. "I stood beside you through everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When your company had nothing, when no one believed in you." Gavin shrugged slightly. "People grow, people change." Then he said the sentence that would stay with her long after this moment ended. "No man is going to want a divorced woman like you anyway." The words struck deeper than the betrayal itself. Those words Gavin spoke in the bedroom would stay in Alira's mind for years. But the painful truth was that there was a time when she believed he was the best thing that had ever happened to her. 5 years earlier, they met in a small co-working space downtown. Alira had been sitting alone at a corner table with her laptop, reviewing a draft of a short story she had been trying to finish for weeks. Writing had always been her quiet dream, something she returned to whenever life slowed down. Across the room, a man paced back and forth while talking to someone on the phone. "I understand the risk," he said into the receiver, frustration edging into his voice. "But the platform works. I just need one investor willing to look past the numbers." He stopped walking and ran a hand through his hair. "No, the prototype isn't the problem. Funding is." He ended the call with a long exhale and sat heavily in the chair across from Alira's table, clearly unaware that she had heard everything. After a moment, he looked up and noticed her watching. "Sorry," he said with an embarrassed smile. "Rough morning." Alira closed her laptop gently. "Startup?" she asked. He laughed softly. "That obvious? Only because you sound like someone who hasn't slept in 3 days." That made him laugh again, this time more genuinely. "I'm Gavin," he said, extending his hand. "Alira." Within minutes they were talking easily. Gavin explained his idea for a tech platform he believed could change the way small businesses managed their online presence. "The problem," he admitted, "is that no one believes in it yet." Alira studied him for a moment. Then she said something that surprised him. "Well, I do." Gavin blinked. "You haven't even seen the full proposal." "Maybe not," she replied with a small smile. "But I can tell when someone believes in what they're building." That simple sentence changed everything. Because sometimes the most powerful support someone can receive is not money or connections. Sometimes it is simply someone saying, "I believe in you." And Alira meant every word. Believing in Gavin turned into something much bigger than a casual conversation at a co-working space. Within a few months, they were inseparable. Most evenings were spent at the small desk in Gavin's apartment, surrounded by papers, coffee cups, and endless drafts of investor presentations. "Does this sound convincing?" Gavin asked one night, sliding his laptop toward her. Alira read the paragraph carefully. "You're explaining the technology," she said. "But investors don't just care about technology." Gavin frowned slightly. "What do they care about then?" "People," she replied. "They want to know how this helps real businesses." She began typing. "Try this. Our platform gives small businesses the tools large corporations already have." Gavin leaned over her shoulder. "That's actually much better," he admitted. Moments like that became routine. Alira wasn't just his girlfriend anymore. She was his editor, sounding board, and emotional support. But supporting Gavin's dream meant putting parts of her own life on hold. When his startup ran out of money during its first year, Alira quietly picked up extra shifts at work. "You're doing too much," Gavin said one night when she came home late. "I'm doing what partners do," she replied, dropping her bag beside the couch. Later that year, when Gavin's company relocated to another city to join an accelerator program, she didn't hesitate. "You'd move for me?" he asked, surprised. Alira shrugged lightly. "Of course. Your opportunity matters." She packed her belongings, left her stable job, and started over somewhere new without complaint. At the time, she believed that love meant building a future together. And she believed that when one partner rises, both people rise with them. It's a lesson many people learn in relationships. Support can be powerful, but healthy partnerships also require balance, appreciation, and respect for both people's dreams. For the first 2 years, Gavin never forgot the role Alira played in helping him keep going. Every small milestone felt like a shared victory. The first investor meeting, the first round of funding, the first office space that wasn't a cramped apartment. One evening, Gavin rushed through the front door holding his phone like it contained the best news in the world. "They said yes," he announced. Alira looked up from the kitchen table where she had been reviewing one of his presentations. "Yes to what?" "The investment deal," he said breathlessly. $200,000. Her face lit up instantly. "That's incredible." She ran across the room and hugged him. "We did it," she said. Gavin smiled at that. But as the months passed and the company began growing, something subtle began shifting. His schedule became more demanding. Late meetings, business trips, networking events. One night, Alira waited at a restaurant for nearly an hour before he finally arrived. "You're late," she said gently. "Traffic," Gavin replied quickly, loosening his tie. He glanced at the menu without really looking at her. "You could have texted," she said. "I'm building a company, Alira," he replied, slightly irritated. "Things get busy." The conversation ended there. Moments like that started happening more often. Another evening, Alira showed him a short story she had been working on. "I finally finished it," she said, handing him the printed pages. Gavin skimmed the first paragraph. Then he placed it on the table. "That's nice," he said distractedly. "But you should probably focus on something practical. Writing doesn't exactly pay the bills." The comment stung more than she expected, but she forced a smile. "Right. Success can change people in ways that are not always obvious at first. Sometimes ambition grows faster than gratitude. And when that happens, the people who helped build the foundation can slowly become invisible." The distance between them didn't happen all at once. It grew quietly. Conversation by conversation, missed dinner by missed dinner. But Alira kept believing things could return to the way they once were. One Friday evening, she left work early and stopped by the grocery store on the way home. As she walked through the aisles, she filled the basket with Gavin's favorites. Fresh pasta, garlic bread, the dark chocolate dessert he always asked for after long days. "If I cook something special," she told herself softly, "maybe we'll finally sit down and talk." When she got home, she tied her hair back and began preparing dinner. Music played softly from the kitchen speaker as the smell of garlic and butter filled the room. For the first time in weeks, she felt hopeful. Around 7, she checked her phone and sent Gavin a message. "Alira, come home soon. I made your favorite." A few minutes later, his reply appeared. "Gavin, working late tonight. Don't wait up." Alira stared at the screen for a moment. Then she typed again. "Alira, just try to come back early." No response came. The pasta finished cooking. The candles she lit slowly melted down their sides. 9 o'clock passed, then 10. Eventually she packed the untouched food into containers and placed them in the refrigerator. "Tomorrow will be better," she whispered to herself before going to bed. What she didn't know was that the next evening would bring the moment that would change everything, because the night she planned to surprise Gavin with dinner would lead to the night she walked into the bedroom and discovered the truth. Sometimes people hold on to hope because they believe love can fix distance. But healthy relationships require effort from both sides, not just quiet patience from one person. The next evening, Alira returned home earlier than Gavin expected. The memory of the untouched dinner from the night before still sat in the refrigerator, and she had spent most of the day convincing herself that tonight they would finally talk. Relationships had difficult seasons. That was normal. What mattered was communicating. At least that's what she believed. She stepped inside the house and closed the door quietly. "Gavin?" She called toward the staircase. No answer. She set her purse on the table and loosened her jacket. "Gavin, are you home?" Still nothing. For a moment she assumed he was working late again. But as she walked toward the kitchen, a sound stopped her mid-step. A woman laughing. Alira frowned slightly. "Hello." The laughter came again, drifting faintly from the second floor. Her heartbeat slowed into a strange, heavy rhythm. Maybe the television was on. Maybe Gavin had co-workers over. Yet something about the tone of that laughter felt personal, familiar in a way that didn't belong inside their home. Then she heard Gavin's voice. Low, relaxed, the same playful tone he used years ago when they first met. Alira's hand slowly tightened around the back of a chair. "Did you hear that?" A woman's voice asked upstairs. Gavin chuckled. "It's nothing," he replied casually. Alira's chest tightened. Nothing? Her mind raced through possibilities, searching for any explanation that made sense. But instinct can be powerful, and something inside her knew. She walked toward the staircase. Each step felt heavier than the last. Halfway up, she heard the woman again. "You said she wouldn't be home tonight." Gavin answered calmly. "She's at her cousin's party. Relax." Alira stopped on the step. Her breath caught. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Then she whispered quietly to herself, "Oh, you really thought I wouldn't come home?" When she opened her eyes again, the confusion was gone. Now, there was only determination. Because sometimes the moment that breaks your heart is the same moment that reveals the truth you refuse to see. And facing truth directly is often the first step toward reclaiming your self-respect. Alira continued up the staircase slowly, her footsteps deliberate now. Every word she had just heard echoed in her mind. "You said she wouldn't be home tonight." The hallway light upstairs was on. The bedroom door was slightly open. From where she stood, she could see a faint glow spilling across the carpet. And she could hear them talking. The woman spoke first. "Are you sure she won't find out?" Gavin laughed softly. "Find out what? That I finally upgraded?" The comment hit Alira harder than she expected. She walked the remaining steps toward the door. Her hand reached the handle. For a moment, she paused. 5 years of memories rushed through her mind, helping him prepare investor pitches, working extra shifts to support his dream, moving cities without hesitation. She exhaled slowly. Then she pushed the door open. The room fell silent instantly. Gavin sat against the headboard. Beside him was a woman wrapped in the sheets. Alira recognized her immediately. "Marissa," she said. Gavin's assistant froze. "Oh, my God," Marissa whispered. Gavin, however, barely reacted. He simply stared at Alira with mild irritation. "You're home early," he said flatly. Alira stepped further into the room, her voice steady. Clearly, Marissa quickly grabbed the blanket. "I didn't know." Alira raised a hand. "Please don't insult my intelligence." Her gaze returned to Gavin. "How long?" Gavin sighed as though the question bored him. "Does it really matter?" The room felt suddenly smaller. Alira shook her head slowly. "No," she said calmly. "You're right." Her voice hardened slightly. "It doesn't matter anymore." Moments like this reveal something important about human character. Betrayal says far more about the person who commits it than the person who discovers it. The silence in the room stretched for a moment. Marissa looked from Gavin to Alira nervously. "Gavin, maybe I should go," she murmured. "Relax," Gavin replied without even glancing at her. This was going to happen eventually. Alira folded her arms. "Eventually," she repeated. Gavin swung his legs off the bed and stood up, completely unconcerned about the situation. "You walking in like this just sped things up a little." Marissa watched the exchange carefully. "You told me she wouldn't come home tonight," she whispered to him. "I said relax," Gavin repeated, irritation creeping into his voice. Then he walked past Alira toward the nightstand. Alira watched him closely. "What are you doing?" she asked. Instead of answering, Gavin picked up a thick envelope from the table. He turned and held it out to her. Actually, this saves me the trouble of bringing it up later. Alira didn't move at first. What is it? Gavin raised an eyebrow. You can read, can't you? Marissa shifted uncomfortably. Gavin, that's kind of harsh. He ignored her. Alira slowly took the envelope from his hand. Her fingers felt strangely numb as she opened it. Inside were several neatly organized legal documents. Her eyes scanned the top page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She looked up at him slowly. You filed for divorce? Gavin leaned casually against the dresser. 2 weeks ago. The words hung heavily in the air. You planned this? Alira asked. Of course, he replied. Marissa looked shocked now. You told me you were thinking about leaving her. Gavin shrugged. I was being polite. Then he looked directly at Alira. You should actually thank me, he added. At least I didn't waste 10 more years pretending. Moments like this teach an important lesson. When someone shows complete disregard for your loyalty, it reveals the kind of character they truly possess. Alira stared at the divorce papers for several long seconds. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained calm. So this was the plan, she said quietly. Cheat on me, and then hand me paperwork like it's a business transaction. Gavin shrugged. Let's not make it dramatic. Marissa shifted uncomfortably on the bed. This feels wrong, she muttered. Gavin waved dismissively. Relax. Adults get divorced every day. Alira slowly placed the papers back inside the envelope. You're unbelievable, she said. Gavin tilted his head slightly. No, I'm realistic. Then he delivered the sentence that made the room go completely still. No successful man wants a divorced woman like you anyway. Marissa blinked in surprise. Gavin, that's true, he interrupted coldly. For a moment, Alira said nothing. Then, something in her expression changed. Not sadness, not shock, something stronger. She stepped forward and slapped the envelope hard against Gavin's chest. You know what's actually embarrassing? She said firmly. Believing a man like you defined my worth. Gavin frowned slightly. You're overreacting. I'm the first? She replied sharply. She turned toward Marissa. You didn't steal my husband, Alira said calmly. You revealed who he really was. Marissa looked down, unable to respond. Then Alira looked back at Gavin. You're not the man I supported anymore. She grabbed her car keys from the dresser. And if success turned you into this, she added firmly, then I'm glad I didn't follow you all the way there. She walked out of the bedroom with her head high. Because strength after betrayal is not about silence. It's about refusing to let someone who disrespected you decide your value. The sound of the front door closing behind Alira echoed louder than she expected. She walked quickly to her car, her hands shaking slightly as she unlocked it. For a moment, she just stood there in the driveway, staring back at the house. 5 years of memories lived inside those walls. 5 years she had spent believing she was building a life with Gavin. Now it felt like she had just been erased from it. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A message from Gavin. Gavin, take the papers. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Alira stared at the message, disbelief rising in her chest. Harder? She whispered. She typed back immediately. Alira, you planned this for weeks. 3 dots appeared. Then his reply came. Gavin, it's business, Alira. People grow apart. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Business? She said out loud inside the car. She placed the phone on the passenger seat and started the engine. Driving anywhere felt easier than standing there. 20 minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot of a quiet grocery store. The lot was nearly empty. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. Everything inside her felt heavy. Confusion, anger, heartbreak. How did 5 years disappear in one night? She whispered. The car slowly grew quiet around her. And for the first time since leaving the house, Alira realized something painful. She didn't have anywhere else to go. Difficult moments like this often teach people an important lesson. Losing a relationship can feel like losing everything, But the ability to start again begins the moment someone decides not to give up on themselves. Morning arrived without Alira realizing she had fallen asleep. Sunlight pushed through the windshield and landed directly across her face. She blinked slowly and sat up in the driver's seat. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then the events from the night before rushed back. Gavin, the bedroom, the divorce papers. She reached for her phone. 10 new notifications. At first she thought maybe friends had heard what happened and were checking on her. But as she opened the messages, her stomach tightened. Melissa, hey. I heard things didn't work out between you and Gavin. Hope you're okay. Alira frowned. Heard? How would Melissa already know? Another message appeared. Trevor, honestly, relationships are complicated. I'm sure both of you made mistakes. She stared at the screen. Mistakes? She murmured. Her phone rang suddenly. It was Jenna, one of the couples they used to go out with. Alira answered quickly. Jenna, have you talked to Gavin? Jenna hesitated on the other end. Yeah. He called a few of us last night. Alira sat up straighter. What did he say? There was a long pause. He said the marriage hasn't been working for a long time, Jenna replied carefully. He told us you've been distant and unhappy. Alira let out a quiet laugh of disbelief. That's what he told everyone. I don't know the full story, Jenna added softly. I'm just saying what I heard. Alira lowered the phone slowly. In just one night, Gavin had already begun rewriting the story. Moments like this reveal a difficult truth about conflict. Whoever speaks first often controls the narrative, which is why honesty and communication matter more than public perception. Later that afternoon, Alira finally gathered the courage to drive to the cafe near the bookstore where she sometimes worked part-time. She needed coffee, and honestly, she needed to see a familiar face. When she walked in, the barista, Marco, greeted her with a quick smile. Hey, Alira. Haven't seen you in a few days. Yeah, she replied quietly. It's been busy. Marco prepared her usual drink and slid it across the counter. Everything okay? Before she could answer, 2 women seated near the window lowered their voices, but not enough. That's her, one of them whispered. Alira's shoulders stiffened. The one Gavin left, the other replied. I heard she pushed him away for years. Alira slowly turned her head. The women quickly looked down at their phones. Marco noticed the tension. Hey, he said quietly, leaning across the counter. Don't listen to that nonsense. Alira forced a small smile. People love a good story, she said. Marco shook his head. People love gossip, he corrected. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This one from a former mutual friend. Daniel, hey, I heard you and Gavin split. I hope you find someone who fits you better. Fits you better. Alira stared at the words for a moment. So now I'm the problem, she murmured. Marco crossed his arms. You know what the truth is, he said firmly. Alira nodded slowly. Yes, but knowing the truth and hearing everyone else believe something else were 2 very different things. Situations like this remind people that rumors can spread quickly, but a person's character is defined by how they respond to unfair judgment rather than how loudly they defend themselves. That night, Alira returned to the same quiet parking lot. The grocery store lights glowed softly above the empty rows of parked cars. She turned off the engine and sat in silence. Her phone rested on the passenger seat. She had stopped reading the messages. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Very few people wanted the truth. Alira leaned her head against the steering wheel. For the first time that day, the tears finally came. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet exhaustion. 5 years, she whispered. Her voice cracked slightly. 5 years of believing in someone who already planned to walk away. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Gavin. Gavin, the lawyers will contact you tomorrow. She stared at the screen. Then she placed the phone face down. No, she said softly. Not tonight. Outside, the world remained quiet. Cars occasionally passed on the distant road. Time moved forward whether she was ready or not. She checked the clock on the dashboard. 3:07 a.m. Alira wiped her face and sat up straighter in the seat. Her reflection looked back at her from the dark windshield. Tired, hurt, but still standing. "You're not finished," she told herself quietly. Her voice grew steadier. "You're going to survive this." She took a deep breath. "And one day, you're going to build something better than the life you lost." Sometimes the most important turning point in life happens in a quiet moment when someone decides that pain will not be the end of their story. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from nothing? If you've ever faced a moment where everything seemed to fall apart, share your story in the comments. And if you believe people deserve second chances and new beginnings, make sure you subscribe to Midnight Story Vault so you don't miss the rest of Alira's journey. 2 weeks later, Alira sat inside a quiet courtroom across from Gavin for the first time since the night she left the house. The room felt cold and strangely formal. A judge reviewed the documents while both lawyers spoke in calm, professional voices. For them, this was routine. For Alira, it was the official ending of 5 years of her life. Gavin barely looked at her. He sat beside his lawyer, scrolling through emails on his phone. At one point, the judge glanced up. "Mrs. Stroud, do you agree to the terms outlined in this settlement?" Alira's lawyer leaned slightly toward her. "This is the best outcome we could negotiate," he whispered. His legal team pushed hard. She looked down at the papers. A small financial settlement. Her car. No shared property. Everything else remained under Gavin's ownership. She lifted her head slowly. "Yes," she answered. The judge nodded. "Then, the marriage is legally dissolved." The sound of the gavel felt heavier than she expected. Gavin stood immediately, adjusting his jacket. "Well," he said casually, finally looking at her, "that was efficient." Alira held his gaze. "That's one word for it." He shrugged slightly. "Life moves on." Then he walked toward the exit without another word. Her lawyer gathered the papers quietly. "I'm sorry," he said. "Divorces involving money can get complicated." Alira stood slowly. "No," she replied softly. "It became simple the moment I realized who I was married to." Legal endings like this often remind people that fairness in relationships isn't always guaranteed, which is why financial independence and personal stability are important parts of protecting one's future. 3 days after the divorce, Alira stood outside a narrow brick building on the quieter side of town. The landlord, Mrs. Calderon, unlocked the entrance door and gestured for her to follow. "It's not luxury," the older woman said honestly as they climbed the staircase, "but it's clean, safe, and the rent is reasonable." "That's exactly what I need," Alira replied. They stopped in front of a small apartment at the end of the hallway. Mrs. Calderon opened the door. Inside was a modest space. A small living area, a compact kitchen, one bedroom with a window overlooking the street. Alira stepped inside slowly. The room echoed slightly because it was empty. "Previous tenant moved out last week," Mrs. Calderon explained. "Fresh paint, new locks." Alira walked toward the window and looked outside. Cars passed quietly below. For the first time in weeks, her mind felt calm. "It's perfect," she said. Mrs. Calderon studied her kindly. "You're starting over, aren't you?" Alira hesitated before nodding. "Yes." The landlord handed her the keys. "Well," Mrs. Calderon said gently, "everyone deserves a fresh start." Later that evening, Alira carried 2 suitcases into the apartment. Her entire life now fit into those bags. She placed them on the floor and looked around the empty room. "No furniture," she murmured. Then she smiled faintly. "That just means I get to choose everything again." Sometimes rebuilding life begins with very small spaces. But those spaces can become powerful reminders that new chapters often start with simple, practical steps forward. A week later, the apartment no longer echoed. Not because it was full of expensive furniture, but because it had begun to feel like hers. A small second-hand couch sat near the window. A wooden table served as both a dining space and a desk. 3 stacked boxes held the few books she had managed to keep after the divorce. That afternoon, Alira returned home carrying a paper bag from the neighborhood bookstore. Inside were 2 novels and a used journal she found on the discount shelf. As she placed the books on the table, her phone rang. It was Marco from the cafe. "Hey," he said cheerfully. "I heard the bookstore down the street needs help organizing inventory. Thought of you." Alira leaned against the counter. "You're serious?" "Yeah," Marco replied. "You love books more than anyone I know." She laughed softly. "That's not exactly a high-paying career." "Maybe not," he said, "but it's honest work. And sometimes peace matters more than prestige." Later that evening, she visited the bookstore. The owner, Mr. Patel, greeted her with a warm smile. "You're Alira? Marco speaks very highly of you." "I hope he didn't exaggerate," she replied nervously. Mr. Patel chuckled. "If you're willing to work hard and care about books, that's enough for me." Alira looked around the quiet store. Shelves filled with stories. Calm. Simple. For the first time in months, she felt something close to relief. Sometimes healing begins when life slows down enough for people to reconnect with the small things that bring genuine peace and purpose. 3 months passed quietly. The bookstore became part of Alira's routine. Every morning she arrived early to help Mr. Patel open the shop. "Good morning, Alira," he would say as he unlocked the door. "Morning, Mr. Patel." She dusted the shelves, arranged displays, and helped customers find books they didn't even know they were looking for. One afternoon, a teenage girl approached the counter holding a novel. "Have you read this?" the girl asked. Alira nodded. "It's one of my favorites." "Is it sad?" the girl asked. "A little," Alira admitted. "But the ending is hopeful." The girl smiled. "I like hopeful stories." After the customer left, Mr. Patel watched Alira thoughtfully. "You should write one yourself," he said. Alira looked up quickly. "Right? You recommend books like someone who understands stories deeply," he continued. "That usually means you have your own inside you." Alira laughed awkwardly. "I used to write. A long time ago." "Why did you stop?" he asked. She hesitated. Life got complicated. That night, after closing the store, Alira returned to her apartment and sat at the small wooden table. The used journal she had bought weeks earlier was still empty. She opened it slowly. The pen hovered above the first page. Then she wrote a single sentence, not for anyone else, just for herself. And as the words began to fill the page, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Moments like this remind people that personal dreams do not disappear simply because life becomes difficult. They often wait quietly until someone finds the courage to begin again. Late one afternoon, the bookstore was unusually busy. A local school had assigned a reading project, and several students were wandering between shelves while Mr. Patel rang up purchases at the front counter. Alira balanced 2 cups of coffee in her hands as she walked toward the small table near the entrance. "Mr. Patel, I brought the coffee you asked for," she called. "Perfect timing," he replied from behind the counter. "You're saving my afternoon." Just as she turned the corner near the door, the bell above it chimed. A man stepped inside at the same moment. Alira looked up too late. "Oh." The coffee cup tilted in her hand. Hot coffee splashed directly onto the front of the man's shirt. "Oh my goodness," she gasped, setting the remaining cup down quickly. "I am so sorry." The man looked down at the spreading stain across his shirt. Alira grabbed napkins from the nearby table and hurried toward him. "I didn't see you come in," she said quickly. "That was completely my fault." Mr. Patel leaned over the counter. "Is everything all right?" Alira winced. "I just attacked a customer with coffee." The man lifted his head slowly. For a brief moment, Alira prepared herself for anger. Instead, he started laughing. Mistakes like this remind people that unexpected moments can introduce new connections, and kindness in small situations often reveals someone's true character. The man continued laughing as he looked down at his shirt. "Well," he said calmly, brushing a napkin across the fabric, "this is definitely the most interesting bookstore greeting I've ever received." Alira blinked in surprise. "You're not upset?" He shook his head. "It's coffee," he replied with an easy smile. "Not permanent damage." Mr. Patel chuckled from behind the counter. "That's a very generous customer." Alira still looked embarrassed. "I really am sorry," she insisted. "I can pay for the dry cleaning." The man waved his hand lightly. "That won't be necessary." He glanced around the bookstore for a moment, before speaking again. "Actually, I came here because someone told me this place has the best book recommendations in the city." Alira crossed her arms slightly. "Well, that person clearly didn't warn you about the coffee hazards." The man laughed again. "I'm willing to take the risk." Mr. Patel pointed toward Alira. "Then you're talking to the right person. She reads everything." The man looked back at her. "Is that true?" Alira smiled faintly. "More than is probably healthy." He extended his hand. "Stellan." She shook it. "Alira." Positive reactions during unexpected situations often reveal emotional maturity, because how people respond to small problems says a lot about their ability to handle bigger challenges in life. Stellan glanced at the shelves surrounding them. "So," he said, "if you had to recommend one book to someone who's trying to rebuild their life, what would it be?" Alira raised an eyebrow. "That's a very specific question." Stellan smiled slightly. "Let's just say I've had a complicated year." She studied him for a moment. Then she walked toward a nearby shelf and pulled out a novel. "This one," she said, handing it to him. Stellan read the back cover quietly. "Second Chances," he murmured. "Interesting choice." Alira leaned against the shelf. "It's not really about second chances," she said. "It's about realizing your life isn't over, just because something didn't work out." Stellan looked up. "That sounds like experience talking." She shrugged. "Maybe." Mr. Patel walked past them carrying a stack of books. "Careful," he joked to Stellan. "Once she starts recommending books, you'll leave with 5. Stellan laughed. "I don't mind." He looked back at Alira. "All right. I'll trust your judgment." He placed the book on the counter. As Mr. Patel rang it up, Stellan asked one more question. "Do you ever read something that changes the way you see your life?" Alira nodded slowly. "All the time." Meaningful conversations often begin with simple questions, because sharing ideas about life and experiences can build connections between people who were strangers only moments earlier. 3 days later, the bell above the bookstore door rang again. Alira looked up from the counter. Stellan walked in holding the same novel she had recommended. She smiled slightly. "Back already?" He raised the book. "I finished it." Mr. Patel looked over from the register. "In 3 days." Stellan shrugged. "Couldn't put it down." He walked to the counter and placed the book gently in front of her. "You were right," he said. Alira folded her arms playfully. "That's my professional specialty." He leaned slightly against the counter. "There was one line that stuck with me," he added. "Oh?" she asked. Stellan nodded. "It said that losing the life you expected can sometimes lead you to the life you were meant to build." Alira paused. "That's one of my favorite lines, too." Mr. Patel smiled as he watched the conversation. "So, what brings you back?" he asked Stellan. Stellan glanced toward Alira. "I need another recommendation." Alira laughed. "You're becoming a regular customer." "Maybe," he replied calmly. Then he added with a small smile, "Or maybe I just like good conversations." Sometimes the best connections grow slowly through shared interests and meaningful conversations, proving that genuine relationships often begin in the most ordinary places. Within a few weeks, Stellan's visits to the bookstore became predictable. Every Tuesday and Friday afternoon, the bell above the door would ring, and Alira would look up already knowing who it was. "Let me guess," she said one afternoon as he walked in. "You finished the last recommendation." Stellan held up the book with a small grin. "Guilty." Mr. Patel laughed from the counter. "At this rate, Alira is going to run out of books." "That's impossible," Alira replied confidently. Stellan placed the novel on the counter. "This one surprised me," he said. "Oh?" she asked. "The main character loses everything," he explained, "but somehow ends up building a better life." Alira tilted her head. "You seem to like stories about rebuilding." "Maybe I relate to them," he answered. That response made her curious. "Bad year?" she asked. Stellan leaned casually against the counter. Let's just say life doesn't always go according to the plans we make. Alira nodded slowly. Trust me, she said quietly. I understand that better than most people. Mr. Patel interrupted with a playful smile. You two should just start a book club at this point. Stellan laughed. Careful, Mr. Patel. I might take that suggestion seriously. Later that day, after the store closed, Stellan waited by the door. Can I ask you something? He said. Alira raised an eyebrow. That depends. Would you like to get coffee sometime? Outside the bookstore, she hesitated for a moment. Just as friends, he added calmly. Genuine friendships often begin with shared interests and simple conversations, reminding people that emotional connections grow naturally when both individuals feel comfortable being themselves. The small cafe across the street from the bookstore quickly became their usual meeting place. Alira arrived first that evening and spotted Stellan already sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee waiting. You ordered for me? She asked as she approached. Stellan slid 1 cup toward her. I remembered what you drink. She sat down, surprised. That's impressive memory. He smiled lightly. Good listeners tend to remember small details. For the next hour, their conversation moved easily between books, travel, and random life experiences. So tell me something, Stellan said. If you could write your own story from scratch, what would it be about? Alira thought for a moment. Someone who loses everything, she answered slowly, but finds something better by accident. Stellan nodded thoughtfully. That sounds like a story worth telling. Their meetings became regular after that. Coffee turned into evening walks. Walks turned into museum visits. But there was one thing Alira noticed. Stellan never rushed anything. One evening, while they walked through a park, she stopped suddenly. You're different, she said. Stellan looked confused. Different how? You never ask about my past, she explained. He shrugged gently. If you want to tell me, you will. And if I never do, then I'll just enjoy the present. Healthy relationships often grow stronger when people respect each other's emotional pace, rather than forcing conversations before someone is ready to share their story. Several months passed before Alira discovered something surprising about Stellan. It happened on a quiet afternoon inside the bookstore. Stellan had just finished browsing the philosophy section when Mr. Patel approached the counter holding his phone. He looked confused. Stellan, he said slowly, is this you? Stellan glanced at the screen. Oh, right, he muttered. Alira leaned closer. What is it? Mr. Patel turned the phone toward her. A news article filled the screen. Stellan Viro announces new global tech expansion. Alira blinked. Then she looked back at Stellan. Wait. She pointed at the photo in the article. That's you. Stellan scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. Yes. Mr. Patel stared at him. You're the CEO of Viro Technologies. Stellan gave a small nod. Alira folded her arms slowly. So, you're telling me that all this time you didn't know? He asked gently. No, she replied, half laughing in disbelief. You never mentioned it. Stellan leaned against the shelf. I didn't want it to change anything. Mr. Patel chuckled. That explains the suit you were wearing the day the coffee accident happened. Alira shook her head. You mean the expensive suit I ruined? Stellan smiled. That was actually one of the cheaper ones. She stared at him. You're joking. He laughed. Maybe a little. He then added calmly, I liked that you talked to me like a normal person. Sometimes, genuine connections form more easily when people meet without titles or status influencing how they treat one another. After the truth came out, Alira expected something to change. Usually when people discovered someone was wealthy or powerful, their behavior shifted almost immediately. But nothing about Stellan changed. The next afternoon he walked into the bookstore exactly the same way he always had. The bell chimed. He waved casually. Good afternoon. Alira folded her arms with a playful expression. Good afternoon. Billionaire CEO. Stellan groaned softly. Oh no. Please don't start that. Mr. Patel laughed from behind the counter. Too late, he said. Now I'm curious. Why are you spending your afternoons in my little bookstore? Stellan leaned on the counter. Because it's quiet here. Then he glanced toward Alira. And the company is better than most business meetings. Alira raised an eyebrow. That might be the most suspicious compliment I've ever received. I'm serious, he replied. Mr. Patel walked away shaking his head. You two sound like old friends. Later that evening, as they locked up the store together, Alira spoke again. You know, she said, most people with your kind of success wouldn't spend their time here. Stellan shrugged. Money changes your lifestyle, he said calmly. But it doesn't have to change who you are. Alira studied him quietly. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since the divorce. Trust. True character often becomes visible through consistent actions, because respect, humility, and kindness reveal far more about a person than wealth or status ever could. A few weeks after Alira realized she could trust Stellan, he appeared at the bookstore earlier than usual one evening. The store was quiet. Mr. Patel had already left. Alira was stacking books near the counter when Stellan spoke. Do you have plans tomorrow morning? She looked up. Tomorrow morning? Yes, he said. Very early morning. Alira laughed. That depends. Are you asking me to read books at sunrise? Not exactly. He leaned against the counter. There's a lake about 30 minutes outside the city. The sunrise there is incredible. She narrowed her eyes playfully. You're inviting me to wake up before dawn. I am. And why would I do that? She asked. Stellan smiled slightly. Because sometimes the best conversations happen when the world is quiet. Alira studied him for a moment. Then she nodded. All right. Healthy relationships often grow stronger through shared experiences, because spending meaningful time together allows people to deepen trust and understanding. The lake was quiet when they arrived. Soft morning light stretched across the water while the sky slowly brightened. Alira wrapped her jacket tighter. I'll admit, she said, this view might actually be worth waking up early. Stellan smiled but looked unusually nervous. You noticed that? She asked. Noticed what? You're quieter than usual. He exhaled slowly. That's because there's something I've been meaning to tell you. Alira turned toward him. All right. Now you've made it serious. Stellan looked out over the lake for a moment before speaking. Alira, the last year of my life has been complicated. She nodded. You mentioned that, but meeting you changed a lot of things for me, he continued. She watched him carefully. What kind of things? He met her eyes. The important kind. Then he said quietly, I love you. Honest communication is essential in meaningful relationships because expressing genuine feelings allows people to build trust and emotional connection. For a moment, Alira didn't answer. The lake was completely still as the sun began rising behind the trees. Stellan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small ring box. Her eyes widened. Stellan. He opened the box slowly. I know your past hasn't been easy, he said gently, but I want a future with you. He took a breath. Will you marry me? Alira's heart raced, but just as the question settled in the air, another voice echoed in her memory. Gavin's voice, cold, dismissive. No man is going to want a divorced woman like you anyway. For a brief second, that old pain resurfaced. She looked down at the ring, then back at Stellan. You know I've been married before, she said quietly. I know, he replied calmly, and his answer held none of the judgment she once feared. Healing from past hurt often begins when someone realizes that one person's cruelty does not define their worth or future. Stellan waited quietly, the ring still open in his hand. Alira looked at him for several seconds. You're not worried about my past? She asked softly. Stellan shook his head. Your past made you the person I admire today. She felt her chest tighten slightly. Gavin used to say a divorced woman had no value. Stellan frowned immediately. That's one of the most foolish things I've ever heard. Alira laughed under her breath. I'm starting to think so too. He stepped closer. Your worth was never determined by someone who failed to appreciate you. The words settled deeply. For the first time, Gavin's voice no longer carried power in her mind. Alira smiled. Then she nodded. Yes. Stellan blinked. Yes? Yes, she repeated, laughing. I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger as the sun rose over the water. Sometimes the most powerful moment in healing is realizing that your value was always yours to define. A few months after the sunrise proposal, Alira and Stellan stood in the same bookstore where they first met. Mr. Patel adjusted his glasses. So, he asked curiously, how big is this wedding going to be? Stellan looked at Alira. That depends, he said. What do you want? Alira smiled softly. Something simple. Simple. Mr. Patel repeated. Yes, she replied. A small garden, close friends, no spectacle. Stellan nodded immediately. That sounds perfect. Mr. Patel laughed. A billionaire choosing a quiet wedding. Now that's unusual. Stellan shrugged. The best things in life rarely need an audience. Choosing meaningful moments over public attention often reflects emotional maturity and a focus on what truly matters in relationships. The wedding took place on a quiet Sunday morning in a private garden. Only a handful of guests attended. Mr. Patel watched proudly as Alira walked down the path. After the ceremony, he whispered to Stellan, You know people will eventually find out about this. Stellan smiled. Let them. 2 days later, the story broke online. A business reporter had spotted the marriage record. By afternoon, news outlets began sharing the headline. Wait, Marco said when he showed Alira the article. The internet is talking about your wedding. She laughed nervously. I guess privacy didn't last long. Sometimes public attention arrives unexpectedly, reminding people that personal milestones can inspire curiosity far beyond their private lives. By the next morning, the story had spread everywhere. Marco burst into the bookstore holding his phone. Alira, you need to see this. She looked up from the counter. What happened? He turned the screen toward her. The headline read, Tech billionaire Stellan Viro marries local bookstore clerk. Alira covered her face, laughing in disbelief. Do they really have to say it like that? Mr. Patel chuckled. Well, it is technically accurate. Stellan, standing beside her, smiled calmly. They're just telling a story. Alira squeezed his hand. I like our version better. Public stories often focus on status, but genuine relationships are built on respect and shared values rather than titles or wealth. Across the city, Gavin sat in his office scrolling through business updates when a headline stopped him. He leaned closer to the screen. Wait. What? His assistant looked over. Something wrong? Gavin turned the laptop toward her. The same headline filled the page. Tech billionaire Stellan Viro marries Alira Monet. For a long moment, he said nothing. That name sounds familiar, the assistant said. Gavin leaned back slowly. Yeah, he muttered. It should. He stared at the photo of Alira smiling beside Stellan. Only then did the reality settle in. Some choices reveal their consequences much later, reminding people that the way they treat others can shape outcomes they never expected. 2 years after the wedding, Alira stood in front of a freshly painted storefront, holding a set of keys. Above the door, a new sign read, Monet Books and Writing Center. Marco whistled beside her. Look at that, he said. Owner Alira Monet. I like the sound of that. Mr. Patel folded his arms proudly. You earned this, he told her. Alira smiled, glancing through the window at the shelves inside. Stellan walked up beside her. Nervous? He asked. A little, she admitted. He squeezed her hand gently. You rebuilt your life one step at a time. This is just the next chapter. Marco laughed. Next chapter? This place is literally full of chapters. Alira unlocked the door. Well, she said softly, stepping inside, let's open the story. Building something meaningful after hardship reminds people that resilience often leads to opportunities that once felt impossible. By late afternoon, the street outside Monet Books and Writing Center was full. Neighbors, readers, and local writers gathered around the entrance while music played softly from inside the store. Marco stood near the door greeting people. "Welcome in." "Free bookmarks on the table," he announced. Inside, Mr. Patel examined the shelves proudly. "You arranged these beautifully," he told Alira. She laughed. "I learned from the best." Stellan leaned toward her. "You know half this crowd is here because they heard your story." Alira glanced around the room. "I hope they stay for the books." A young woman approached the counter, holding one of Alira's notebooks. "Are you the owner?" she asked. Alira nodded. "I want to start writing," the woman said shyly. Alira smiled. "Then you're exactly where you belong." Communities grow stronger when people share knowledge and support creative dreams that encourage learning and self-expression. As the celebration continued, the bell above the door rang again. Marco glanced up. "Welcome." His voice stopped mid-sentence. Alira noticed the pause and turned toward the entrance. A man stood near the doorway. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. His suit looked wrinkled, his posture tired. Then their eyes met. "Gavin." Marco leaned closer to her. "You know that guy?" he whispered. Alira nodded slowly. "Yes." Gavin stepped inside cautiously. "Hi, Alira." The room felt quieter around them. "It's been a while," she replied calmly. He glanced around the bookstore. "This place is impressive," he said. Mr. Patel approached from behind the counter. "Can I help you find something?" Gavin shook his head. "No, I just came to talk." Moments like this often remind people that past choices can lead to unexpected reunions, where reflection and accountability become unavoidable. Alira stepped slightly aside, guiding Gavin toward a quieter corner of the store. "So," she said calmly, "what did you want to talk about?" Gavin looked around the bookstore again. "You built all this," he said quietly. "With help from good people," she replied. He nodded slowly. "I've thought about you a lot these past 2 years." Alira folded her arms. "Why now?" Gavin sighed. "My company didn't survive," he admitted. "Bad decisions. Investors pulled out." She listened without interrupting. "I used to think success meant leaving people behind," he continued. "Now I realize I lost the one person who believed in me." He looked directly at her. "I made the biggest mistake of my life." Alira's voice remained steady. "You made a choice." Gavin lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry." She nodded once. "I hope you learn from it." Real growth often comes when people take responsibility for their actions and accept that some opportunities cannot be reclaimed once they are lost. After Gavin left the bookstore, Alira stood quietly near the window for a moment. Stellan walked over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Just thinking about how different life is now." He smiled softly. "You built this." Life often becomes clearer when people look back and recognize how far they've come after difficult seasons. Alira glanced around the store filled with readers and writers. 2 years earlier, she had been sleeping in her car, wondering how she would survive. Now she owned a place where stories and ideas could grow. "I finally understand something," she told Stellan. "What's that?" he asked. "My worth never depended on anyone else. True confidence often begins when people stop measuring themselves through someone else's approval." Stellan smiled as he looked around the bookstore. "Funny how life works," he said. Alira nodded. "If my old life hadn't ended, I never would have met you." He laughed softly. "That might be the best accident in history. Sometimes losing the wrong relationship creates space for healthier love built on respect." As the event continued, Alira greeted another group of visitors entering the bookstore. Her life had changed in ways she never expected, not because she proved someone wrong, but because she chose to move forward. Sometimes rejection is not the end of a story. Sometimes it is the beginning of a better one. If this story moved you, share in the comments. Have you ever turned a painful ending into a better beginning? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more powerful stories here at Midnight Story Vault.